Okay. Okay, so welcome to our first extra session. In general, the way that these are going to work is that we'll have these every Friday. It'll just be after this class for for about an hour or so. And I'm going to go over some things that I think are cool and that a lot of people really enjoy doing. I might also assign some extra credit homework, just sort of as a incentive for coming, and as practice for applying the material that we're learning. I'm going to be doing that today. I haven't actually posted the specs for that yet, but I'll just sort of describe that at the end of class, and then I'll post those later. But it's going to involve adapting your second homework assignment. So you're going to adapt your second homework assignment a little bit to use some of the things that we're discussing today. So I want to begin with a couple different things. I'm really into typography, so I really like, where's the typography, transitions, that's what I call it, there we go. I'm really into typography. If you've done the problem from, there was a problem in section on Tuesday that dealt a lot with typography, the Arcadia one. This deals a lot with laying out type on the screen to sort of replicate this in an HTML document, which is a lot of fun if you like type. That's a good problem to go over. I'm going to go over quite a few different aspects of web type and some of the more confusing elements, how to incorporate nicer fonts into your page, what sort of the basic web fonts are. Then we'll move on to the whiz-bang kind of stuff. First of all, line spacing is really important actually in HTML. It's important in typography and in HTML. It's really important to learn to manipulate line height appropriately. The idea with line height is that it's the amount of spacing between two lines, and it's usually measured from baseline to baseline. So the baseline is the line that text sort of sits on and that descenders hang beneath. So the bottom of a P and the bottom of a Q and G, those are descenders, and everything else just sort of rests on the baseline. So from baseline to baseline, that's what we're referring to with the line height here. It's also called leading. And leading is an important feature of anything that is intended to be readable. So the longer the line length is, the less readable type becomes, because if we undo this, this line height here, our eye has to go all the way back to the beginning of the next line, and it's easy to get lost. And so there's a sort of a range of line lengths where an ideal line height for every line length. And in general, if you increase the line length, you need to increase the line height as well. A good rule of thumb is that the line height should be roughly the length of the line in ems. So if times 5%, or roughly the size of the body font in ems times 1.5. Those are some good rough estimates of a good readable line height for based on the line lengths. You should generally resist having really long line lengths. Generally between 25 and 33 times the base font size is a good line length. So this line length is too long. I should restrict this element so that it's much narrower. I'm going to say width 40 ems. That's probably a good line length. And the line height for that is probably a little bit less than it should be. I'm going to increase it a little bit. 1.8 maybe, 1.6. There we go. That's probably pretty good. So that's a good attractive line height. A couple more things. So this is some anatomy of type. As I mentioned, the baseline is what everything rests on. The P down there is a descender. Caps and ascenders go from the X height to the cap height, or the ascender height. And then the median line is what the X reaches up to. The X height is the baseline to the median. Typefaces can be serifed. These things have serifs here, these little flourishes. They can be serifed fonts can be more legible at smaller sizes. So on the web in general, in particular, it's oftentimes a good idea to choose a serifed font as opposed to a sans serif font. Serif fonts are generally good for larger display fonts, so like headers and things like that. And let's see. So we looked at the vertical line property and how it relates to things on the page. You can think of sort of inline content as having a line box that stretches from the top of the text to the bottom of the text. And that's a line box that goes from the beginning of the line to the end of the line, and then the beginning of the next line to the end of the next line. And this property adjusts inline content with respect to that box line. We talked about that yesterday, so I don't want to go too much into that. Letter spacing can be very important, especially at large and small sizes. These two headers here, these sort of display fonts, have been letter spaced very, very slightly. If I undo them, I think you can see that it's a little bit nicer the way it is. So let's see, letter spacing, undo. Okay, so that's a little bit too wide. So I've letter spaced them to have a negative letter spacing of just 0.05 ems. So 0.05 ems, negative 0.05 ems, tightens it up a little bit and makes it a lot more readable. Same thing with this Warbs and Warbingers. Letter spacing 0.03, but I've also adjusted word spacing. Word spacing is the space between words. So if I undo the letter spacing, that's a little bit too tight. And if I undo the word spacing, I don't know, it just doesn't look quite as good. So I will space it out a little bit more and tighten up the words a little bit. It looks a little bit nicer. These small caps here I've made 0.8 ems, I think, and it looks a little bit nicer to have smaller caps when you have all cap stuff. Hanging indentation, text indent allows you to indent the first line of a line of text. So this line of text here, the first line is indented. That's how, what you use text indent for. If you want to indent the entire left edge, how would you indent the entire left edge? We already know how to do that. Yeah, just a margin or padding or something. I would probably do margin. But text indent is just for the first line. It's useful sometimes. What do I do? Oops, I think I clicked on. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on type here. I'm going to get to the fun stuff. Text transform allows you to change the capitalization of stuff. I use it for text transform uppercase, so I've transformed this into uppercase. I've made the font size 0.8 ems. That's sort of converted this into rough approximation of small caps. And then I've also letter spaced this out just a little bit. Makes it look pretty nice. You can do uppercase, lowercase, or capitalize, which is title caps. I would avoid using, there's one called font variant small caps. I would avoid that because it's actually really just awful small caps. This is a simulated small cap, and it doesn't look anything like a real small cap. A real small cap, so this is just these are scaled down versions of the actual capitals. A real small cap is actually just a little bit thicker and a little bit bolder, so that it looks the same weight as the caps. I would avoid doing that. This is a list of sort of the core web fonts. The core web fonts are web fonts that are considered to be pretty much universal. A lot of these are included in Microsoft Office, so this list is sort of a comprehensive list of most of the standard web fonts that you can rely on. I would pick and choose several of these. Some of these are predominantly Windows, some of them are predominantly Mac. I would sort of pick and choose some of these that would go well together. If you don't have, so that will like complement each other on different systems. People have put together what are called font stacks, which are lists of similar, consistent, cross-platform lists of fonts in such a way that you can predict on any particular platform, which pair of fonts are going to be used. So Garamond, for example, Garamond is a Mac only. It comes with the Mac by default. So, but it doesn't come with Windows by default. So if we're on a Mac, we're going to see this. If we're on a Mac, we might also see this. We might also see this. But if we're on Windows, then we'll probably see these two. So the ordering is important. These last ones here we know are Windows only, and these the first three are are Mac only. So if we're on Windows, we know that we're going to see this pair. And then this is a little bit less common than these are, which is less common than these are, and so on. So if you pick a good stack, it's nice and predictable which pair of fonts will be used on a particular system. You can include fancy fonts using in CSS3. You can incorporate what's called you can do like what's called an import, a font face import, which specifies a downloadable file that has characters in a different font that you want to include on the page. Good place to go for some free open source fonts is Google Web Fonts. They've got some pretty great fonts. And the great thing about them is that as soon as you choose a font, they'll just give you a CSS link or like a CSS code or an HTML link tag that will allow you to import that content. So I don't know why Firefox is so slow. It's probably got to do with the fact that I'm screencasting. Okay, so if we like this font, for actually no, I'm going to look for Open Sans. So I'm going to use that for another example. Everybody have a nice 4th of July? Yeah. So the great thing about Google Web Fonts is that you can both download the original font file to put on your local machine, or you can link to it dynamically from a web page. Okay, so that's Open Sans. This is a great collection here because I can, this has several different weights to it. Fonts oftentimes will have more weights than just like normal or bold. They'll have lots of different weights in between. And this is a particular font that has several different weights. So I really like that one. I'm going to really like, this is getting really bad. I'm switching. Go, add that to our collection, review, use, here we go. So when we click use, it allows us to select which weights we would like. So I'd like normal, I'd like book, and maybe I'm not going to use, maybe I'm going to use bold, and I'm also going to use bold italic. Let's include extra bold. And it gives you sort of a meter here that indicates, because the more fonts you download, the longer your page is going to take to load, because you have to download the font files for each of these fonts. And you can also choose different character sets, which is cool. You can use Vietnamese and Greek if you want. I don't know. We'll just use Latin. And then it'll give you a couple of different ways that you can incorporate this in your CSS. You can copy this link here. This is a link tag that you can just put into your document. So let's open here. We'll just create a new web font. Font.html. Template So paste our link in there. This is a dynamic link to fonts.google.com, fonts.googleapis.com, and it specifies which fonts that we're going to download. And if we actually, let's just as h1 hello world, and then I'm just going to go ahead and add a style tag up here, just to be quick about it. That specifies that h1 is h1 is going to be font family. Actually, I'll do this on the body. Body font family is going to be Open Sans. Open Sans. It's the name of the font there, so it's going to be Open Sans. And then h1, I'm going to make h1 be font weight is going to be 800 instead of, so normal I believe is 600 or 700. I'm going to make this thicker bold, so I'm going to make it 800. And then I'm going to say P is going to be maybe font weight 100. Did I include 100 there? I included 300. Okay, 300. So this is going to be a little bit lighter than normal. Okay, so we have this extra bold and we have this slightly lighter than normal. I'll just adjust these back to normal and bold so you can see the difference. So this is a little bit thicker and this is a little bit thinner. So that's an example of linking to the web font. If we actually just copy this URL here, we can see the original CSS code that actually defines this this font. So we got a bunch of these font face declarations that sort of basically introduce this name so that later on you can say font family this. Specifies what weight is this thing, where to get the file, stuff like that. So that's the details about how it's declared. Okay, so that's including a web font on the page. It's very, very useful and it's becoming more and more popular. There are a couple of different type effects that you can use in CSS3. This one is going to be really tough to see, but this is sort of a common thing nowadays on the web to sort of emboss something a little bit. Like I mean, it's almost invisible. Like, you can't even really see it there, but there's like a little bit of white around this. And the way that we've done that is we put a text shadow on that, just a single 1 pixel text shadow that's really white, but it actually has like 0.75 opacity, and that ends up making this look a little bit embossed. That's a common thing. It's a very, very subtle thing that can make it really easy on the eyes. This is something that's only available in Safari and Chrome right now, but this is a stroke, allows you to create a, oh, this is a text shadow actually. It's a drop shadow effect. Stroke, stroke allows you to do a text outline. You can't see it in this browser because this is Safari. A list of more precise font weights. Basically, you can specify any weight between 100 and 900, and the browser will just round to whichever one is available. So if we have Open Sans imported, Open Sans isn't actually available in 100. So if we say 100, it's just going to round up to 300. Ems are really interesting. So the way that ems work is very weird, actually. So you can specify, if you specify the font size in ems and margin and padding in ems, they'll actually be totally, completely different things. So in this example, we have these sort of before and after things. On the left here, we have a paragraph. On the right, we have an H2. And the H2 by default is like 1.5 M, 150% of the base font size, right? And the paragraph here is just the base font size. So by default, this is 1.5 M's of, the default is 150% of what the base font size is. So we can express that in 1.5 M's. M is relative to the font, the size that it inherits. But when we specify font size, that's different from when we specify margin top and bottom. Notice that we're specifying font size 1.5 M's, but margin top 1 M, margin bottom 1 M. But the space here, before and after, is identical, right, to the height of this thing. So this is 1.5 M's, but this is 1 M and this is 1 M. How does that work? Well, when you specify the font size, it's relative to what it inherits, so from the body or from its containing element. And then when you specify any other box model properties, it's relative to the font size. So you specify this first, and then this becomes relative to that. So 100% of 150%. Which is the exact same height as this thing here. Okay, so that's one of the things that makes M's really quirky. So in order to set a margin top and a margin bottom, so in order to set the margin bottom so it's the same amount of space as over here, we actually, even though over here we're specifying margin bottom 1 M. Over here, we have to specify 0.6666 M because that's 1 divided by 1.5. 1.5 being the font size. 1 being the what we want over here. And then for the top, in order to accommodate this, in order to basically, we want there to be sort of half an M over there. What would on the left be half of M? On the right, we have to say half an M divided by the font size, which is 0.333. Okay. So you got to do some math with M's in order to get everything to work out properly. But they're still good. Base font sizes and scales. I don't really want to go over this, but you can decide on a scale if you want to. Lots of traditional scales involved that increment the font size by certain values that are appealing. Some more articles with regards to web type. Somebody at some point said web design is 95% typography. You could argue for and against that. That's probably not the point, but typography is something that a lot of people tend to overlook. People tend to look for fancy graphics and stuff like that, but type really does a lot for making a page readable. Okay, so that's that. Let's move on to special effects. So in CSS3, we have the ability to do lots of really cool things with adjusting dimensions of things, doing affine transformations of things, which is really fun. And we can even do animations. Tweening, and we can also do three-dimensional manipulation of elements, which is pretty cool, and actually take things visually, three-dimensionally out of the page. So the transform property is the base property that allows us to do affine transformations. And the way that it works is we just say transform, and then we have a comma-separated list of things to do to that element. Among the things that we can do is we can translate it, which is just moving it around on the page and to certain coordinates. Rotate, scale, and skew. We'll see all of those in a sec. But the fact that this is unfinished means that we're going to have to do something called browser prefixing. Browser prefixed properties are properties that are sort of temporary, unfinished. They're something that are supported by browsers, but they're not an official part of the spec yet. And so the way that works is you prefix it with dash, some browser name dash. So you prefix transform with dash WebKit transform. That will apply to Safari and Chrome. Those are the WebKit-based browsers. Dash Moz applies to Mozilla-based browsers. Dash MS applies to Microsoft Internet Explorer-based browsers, and Dash O applies to Opera-based browsers. In general, it's a good idea to include all of these whenever you actually do a production website. There are tools that allow you to paste in this and have it automatically generate all of this for you, which is somewhat useful. For all of our examples, we're just going to use transform because Mozilla now just supports the transform property. And eventually that's what's going to happen is everything is just going to support the transform, the official transform property. Okay, so a couple different transformations. The translate function just moves something by coordinates. You can specify percent, pixels, ems, any of the usual CSS dimension units. So that's the original one. This is the transformed one. Scale scales by an x factor and a y factor in the x dimension and y dimension. So a scale of 0.5 and 1.25. Scales it to 50% in the x direction and 1.25 in the y direction. Rotate accepts an angle with units to rotate something. So this is one way that you can get text to go vertically, like rotate it so that it goes left to right from top to bottom. If you rotate by 90 degrees, so that's fun. Skew is kind of interesting. It's kind of tough to see exactly what this does sometimes, but if I turn off, let's see, if I just make it Y skew, you can sort of see that it's sort of sheared in the Y direction. And if I make it only in the X direction, you can see that it's sheared in the X direction as well. Okay. Transform origin. This moves the 0, 0 point by some dimensions. This fixes the origin of the transformation with respect to the element. So left bottom makes the left bottom the origin, particularly with respect to like rotation. This becomes important. So this one has an origin of left bottom. This one has an origin of the default center. So rotating around the center or rotating around this other point. 3D transforms are pretty nifty. There are some interactive examples here. Let's see, 3D transforms. We can, I don't think this is the one I wanted to look at. There's another one. Use transforms. Okay, this one's pretty cool. 3D transforms. So I can hover over these various things to have them be rotated. Firefox is just driving me crazy today. Anybody doing anything fun this weekend? Here we go. Okay. So if I hover over this stuff, you can see animated transitions between those. Well, we'll talk about transitions later. But here we go. This is one of the things I wanted to do. If you want to transform elements in 3 dimensions, you can. In this case, we've got 6 sides that we're transforming in 3 dimensions just by modifying certain properties. So these are the basic transforms. Rotate on the X direction and the Y direction. By default, if you just say rotate, that is around the Z axis, right? So this is rotated around the y-axis. This is rotated around the x-axis. Again, those are all in angles. This one is not only rotated but scaled in the z direction. So let's see. So this is translated in the z direction in a negative z direction, which makes it further away. So like we're the camera and we're moving it further away from the camera. So we're moving it into the z axis, which makes it look further away, which makes it look smaller. If we change this to plus 5 ems, then it makes it look closer. This one is rotated on the y-axis, so we've gone like this, and then we've scaled it, or sorry, we've translated in z direction. So we rotate like this, and then we go out like this. So that's what we've done with this one. And then we've also scaled it in the z direction. Oh, that makes it a little bit bigger. No, I forget what that does. Scaling in the z direction, what would that do? Oh yeah, okay, so if we adjust the scaling, maybe, no, that's, let's make it like 1. Oh, okay, I don't know what that does. I forgot. Okay, this one is 3D perspective distortion. We can adjust the, oh, this is, maybe I forgot to browser prefix this one. This is one that doesn't always work in Firefox, but it allows you to adjust the distortion. If we look at this here, this is an example of perspective distortion. I don't quite know how to describe that, but maybe it's like as if you're moving the camera really close or like really far away. That makes sense? Okay. Transitions. This is the fun stuff. Okay. Transitions, when I hover over this, they're going to be, let's see, we have 1, 2 transitions going on here. So we have transformed and transformed hover. When we hover over it, oh, we have 3 transitions going on. The font size is going to increase to 200% when I hover over it. It's also going to, let's see, so by default it's rotated 45 degrees as it is right now. When I hover over it, it's going to rotate 10 degrees. So rather than being rotated negative 45, it's going to move around, negative 45, it's going to move around to just positive 10. So initially it's, let's see, the background color is red. When I hover over it, the background color is going to be blue. And the scale is going to be 1.5. And what I've done is I've specified, not on the hover, but on the initial state, I've said, if any of these properties ever change, I want you to transition the change. I want you to animate the change. So I want you to transition the transform property across 2 seconds using this particular easing function. We'll talk about that in a second. And I want you to transition the background color for 0.5 seconds using this easing function. So there are 2 properties that are going to be animated. The transform is going to be animated, so that's the rotation. It's going to be animated. And then the background color goes from red to blue. That's going to be animated. The other thing is not going to be animated. This font size, it's immediately going to jump up to 200%. It's not going to be animated because I haven't specified that if that changes, it should transition. So when I hover over this, it immediately becomes 200%. The rotation happens immediately. But the background color, so this last, I remember what this last 2 seconds thing here is. That's a delay. I'm delaying the transition of background color for 2 seconds, and then after those 2 seconds, I'm going to transition the background color across 0.5 seconds. So you'll notice that this is 2 seconds, and this is delayed for 2 seconds. So this is going to happen first, and then this is going to happen after that is finished. Rotate, and then the blue transition occurs. Okay. The easing functions specify like how the animation speeds up and slows down over time. I don't really want to get into those, but they can be fun to change. Where to specify transitions? So we use the transition property to specify transitions. That's different from the transform property, which allows us to do affine transformations. One of the things that we can specify is if we have any affine transformations, we can transition the transform property, or we can transition the background color property. We can transition the font size property. If I wanted the font size transition to be transitioned gradually, I could specify an additional transition for the font size. So this first thing here is the property that we want to transition. It's important to put this transition on the correct in the correct rule. So I've put this in this before it's changed rule. In the after it's changed rule, in the the target is to have font size 200%, background color blue, and these particular transformations applied. So this is the before, this is the after, and I specify on the before state, if any of these particular properties ever change, I want the transition to be animated. So oftentimes students feel compelled to put this transition property on the hover, and that's the wrong place to put it. The right place to put it is just attaching it to the element, saying if these properties are ever changed on this element, I want you to animate the changes. So you attach it sort of before the fact. So this is another example of that. Width and height of 5 ems. I'm going to transition width across 1 second and height across 1 second and font size across 1 second. And dot enlarge, so the enlarged class is width 7.5, height 7.5, font size 1.5. So this is its initial state. I'm going to attach a class to it using JavaScript. We haven't looked at JavaScript yet, but I'm going to attach a class to it using JavaScript, which causes some of these properties to change. So I need to specify before those properties are changed that if these properties ever change, I want the transition to be animated. So I click on this, and it's broken. It's not doing anything. Oh, that's probably because I used, okay, yeah. Well, this would increase to 7.5 ems and the font size and so on. I don't really want to look at this. This is something pretty interesting. You can do some funky stuff. This disappears past 90 degrees because the back is not visible because I've set back face visibility to hidden. It's kind of interesting. And then this one remains visible from behind. This one is rotated 60 degrees from the element. That's kind of fun. Okay. Browser prefixing. Last note on browser prefixing is if you're using the transition property and you're transitioning the transform property, so the transform property does affine transformations. So normally, without browser prefixing, you'd say transition transform, assuming you have transform applied elsewhere. If it's browser prefixed, you're going to have to do this. So O transition, O transform, MS transition, MS transform, MOS transition, MOS transform. Okay, because the transform property, both the transition property and the transform property are sort of unfinished. So, okay, last thing I want to talk about, and probably the most, probably the one that you guys are going to be most interested in, is mobifying your website, adapting your website dynamically so that it can be visible to as many people as possible on as many devices as possible without any interfering or having to adapt it manually. So this is a, let's see, this is a relatively current um, sampling of the number of browsers used on the web. So about 15%, 20% now are smartphones and tablets, and that's ever increasing. The remaining 80% is still desktop usage or laptops, but that's a significant portion of people who are accessing lots of websites on smaller devices. And the UI needs are different on desktop devices than they are on smaller devices. Obviously, we adapt the user interface on smaller devices with touch screens and things, and with swipe gestures, and there are different HCI requirements for smaller devices. How do we accommodate the smaller screen sizes? Well, there's something called responsive web design that is a very potent and a really important concept on the web nowadays. And that is it used to be that people would create two completely different versions of the same site. One intended to be viewed on a smaller screen and one intended to be viewed on a desktop. And at some point people decided, you know what, there are so many different screen sizes now. I mean, if you think of just like the difference between an iPhone screen size and an iPad mini screen size and an iPad screen size versus other tablets available, like every other tablet has different screen sizes. So at some point somebody decided we need to make our website, we need to write our website once and make it more flexible and more adaptable so that it responds according to changes in screen width. And we do that using what's called CSS3 media queries. We'll take a look at that in a second. So this is an example of a fluid columns example. So we have each of these things is a .col. They're each floated left with a width of 32% and a margin right of 2%. So this one is a width of 32%. There's a 2% gutter here. Each of these has a margin right of 2%. And then I'm using a special fancy CSS3 selector here, nth child, to remove the right margin on every third child. So that's a fun thing you can use. So what I've done is so this is 32, 32, 32 plus 2 adds up to 100%. Okay, so this is one way that we can make a fluid layout. If I adjust this page, the widths of these changes, right? So that's nice. However, I still have a problem with it remaining. What I'd like to do is get to the point where at a certain size, I don't want them to be squished to a certain size anymore. I want them to start wrapping and rearrange themselves into maybe 2 by 3 instead of 3 by 2, and then maybe 1 by 6 instead of 2 by 3. I'm just going to leave this unfull screened so I can resize. So maybe at this point I'd like it, I mean this is too small, I'd like it to wrap to 2 by 3, and then maybe at this point I'd like to wrap it to 1 by 2. So how do we accomplish that? We do that with what are called media queries. So we have this link tag here that links to a CSS file. And there's an optional additional attribute here called media that's always been used in CSS. It's kind of an important part of CSS. Some of the values of this are screen, print. You can have a different style sheet for print than for screen. You can say all if you want it to be all media. If you look at actually the source code of our lecture slides here, we've got, let's see, Firefox is really killing me. We have a couple of links here. We have media equals projection. So this is intended, a style sheet intended for like a presentation kind of thing. And then we have screen and we have print. So a different style sheet will be applied if you just print this document. a different style sheet will be applied. It won't come out like it looks on the screen. So that's always been used, but what we've added are these sort of query things. Media equals screen, and then inside these parentheses we're specifying a CSS property that has to be true, a condition that has to be met. If this condition is met, this CSS file is loaded. If this condition isn't met, this CSS file is not loaded. So what we're doing here is we're saying we have this default.css that applies anytime we're viewing it on a screen. We have this mobile.css that applies if we're viewing it on a screen and the width is at maximum 800 pixels. So if it's smaller than 800 pixels, or up to 800 pixels, then this CSS will also apply to this page. And what this style sheet can do is this can override certain things in this style sheet. And then as an example here, if so maybe we're on a really large display screen and min width equals 1200 pixels. So if we're larger than 1200 pixels, then this style sheet will apply instead. So what the browser will do is it'll see all of these files, it'll load and parse and process them all, but it will only apply the rules from this style sheet when these conditions are met, and it will only apply the rules from this style sheet when these conditions are met. So this allows you to override the default styles for different screen sizes. So, for example, in the default.css, we have a 3-column width, float length, 32% width. We have the same 2% margins on the right. Then we're doing the every third child margin right 0. Okay, that's wait, is that default.css? 3-column. Maybe my screen is too wide. Oh, here we go. Let's open up Web Developer. Anybody ever used the Web Developer extension? You guys installed this yet? Okay. It's a good toolbar, Web Developer toolbar. This is a good complement to Firebug. It's an additional toolbar that gets installed on the top here. It's just called Web Developer Toolbar. And it allows you to do certain things like disable caching, disable pop-up blocking, disable cookies, disable style sheets, view the CSS, I don't know, do stuff with forms and images, and it's a super useful thing. One of the cool things I can do is, let's see, tools, resize, here we go. Resize the window to a particular dimension. So I'm going to resize this as 1200 wide. Okay, so that's 1200 pixels. At 1200 pixels, all of a sudden, or beneath 1200 pixels, all of a sudden, let's see, so I had this large that was applying. Beneath 1200 pixels, then neither of these is applying. It's just the default. So I have this 3-column layout, which is this stuff. If I make it less than at, what is it, it's 800 pixels. So at some point here, it's going to get to 800 pixels, and it's going to switch. Where is it? There we go. Now all of a sudden it switched. So once it gets to less than 800 pixels, then all of a sudden this mobile.css applies, and it overrides these styles with 48%, margin right 4%, and then I have to undo the stuff from the 3nth stuff over here, and then make it every second child have a margin right of 0. Okay. So what I've done is I've adapted this for a smaller screen, and then obviously I would want to add a third one here so that maybe when I get to this point or somewhere before that, I make it all of a sudden just a single column. And this is the great thing about floats, is that you can do this. Actually, you don't even have to do this with floats. If you make, you don't even have to use media queries. If you use floats, if they're a fixed width, you can, they will automatically just wrap according to the screen size, which is great. The thing that media queries allows you to do is allows you to retain that flexibility. and then wrap them at certain screen sizes. So that's a pretty cool thing. So a couple of techniques that you might want to use for this. You can, so as we did, we added or reduced the number of columns based on the width as things grow and shrink. You'll probably want to identify certain places where you're going to have to, like, you can't go any narrower than this. So that's going to be your stopover point. You're going to apply a new CSS rules beneath that point that change the appearance. You can also unfloat elements completely if you just want to make them just stack. If you oftentimes the smallest size, you'll just completely, you don't have to float anything. Everything is just all of a sudden stacked because you don't have any room to have anything next to anything else. What I did with these columns here, in order to calculate these columns here, actually, well, I just sort of chose, I sort of arbitrarily chose 32% and 2% gutters. In order to calculate percentages, oftentimes it helps to calculate based on a certain width that you think the user will see the page in. So 940 pixels, if I anticipate that my user will probably have 940 pixels width, then I can calculate based on these fixed widths what percentages will be for the different columns and for the gutters. And then they'll grow and shrink proportionally on either side of that, either side of 940 pixels. Some common stopover points: 240 pixels for a small phone. 320 is iPhone Portrait. That's probably a little bit old now. The iPhone 5 is taller, as you probably know. So this is more like, I don't know, 380 or probably something by now. 480 is iPhone Landscape. Oh, sorry. iPhone Portrait is 320. iPhone Landscape is probably a little bit larger now. Small tablet. iPad 768. iPad Landscape. Wide desktop. So you can change the stopover points based on some of these common stopover points. An example of this. Actually, no, I don't think this example is actually working. Maybe I'll show an example of this on the Firefox website. What I wanted to do is I wanted to show an example of this. Let's see. I think it might be About. About is one of the pages that I really like on this site, the design of it. Yeah, okay, now watch this. This is pretty crazy. Okay, so these images, notice how they're growing and shrinking. They're automatically scaling. But they're also wrapping. So there are several different stop points here where it's dynamically scaling these, but at some point it's going to completely move them into different rows and columns. And at this point, if I go a little bit narrower than this, watch what happens. So there's this extra thing that appears up here. Mission about products get involved. Where did those come from? Those were from right there. So those used to be this list of links here, and I've changed their appearance so that they're now in this little menu appearance. This is also a common thing, and you can do this purely with CSS. You can't make it do it when you click purely using CSS, so this incorporates some JavaScript as well. But at least this appearance here, you can transform from this to just collapse it into an image and hide this list. So that was a list over here before. It's still a list, and we're just styling that list differently. And we're only showing this list once we click on this thing. So that's the example that I was going to do. I think that slide's broken. And then you can see all the rest of this stuff. this stuff is vertical right now, but if I get to a little bit wider, now it's in 2 columns. Still in 2 columns, but just bigger. And then the other stuff at the bottom of the page also adapts. So sign me up moved to be stacked instead of side by side. Sometimes everything jumps around a little bit sometimes with this. And then these things I think were side by side as well. Anyhow, so this is an example of responsive design. So I haven't published it yet, but I'm going to post later on some specs for an optional homework assignment. It will be worth measly points, like a point or something, if you turn it in. And probably only to make up for a lost point on a homework assignment. So you can't get more than 100% credit for your homework score. So it's going to be a lot of work for very little reward, but your even being here is, you want to get the reward from this additional material. So your goal will be to adapt the second homework assignment so that it incorporates responsive elements of responsive web design. So obviously this is a 2-column layout. Actually a 3-column layout. We have 2 columns of reviews on the left, and then we have a column of other stuff on the right. So I want you to analyze the structure of this page and add some media queries and some additional smaller CSS documents that reflow the structure of this page based on the width of the screen. You probably don't want to go any wider than what it is now, although you might want to. You can make this fluid. You can add a 3rd column here if you want of reviews. You can make the widths of these are already fluid, but the widths of the overall page is specified in pixels. So you can make this column fluid. You can make the entire overall thing fluid. You can give it a maximum so that it won't stretch any further. You can even this border up here, the banner is supposed to be centered, right? So at some point, if the page width becomes less than the width of this banner, the banner goes from like there to there. If the page width becomes less than the width of the banner, what you'll probably want to do is no longer center it and have only the have the page, as we resize, sort of cut off more and more of the right-hand side of it. So that, and then at some point you'll probably want to enforce some sort of minimum. So I'll write up some of those specs later today, and then I'll post that today. That'll be due like next Friday at the next extra session. And you guys can work on that. So any questions before we head out for the weekend? Yeah. What you'll probably want to do is modify certain aspects of the CSS for your solution to homework 2. Like for example, in homework 2, this overall content area and this right-hand column here are fixed at like certain pixel widths. It's okay if you want to make those, specify those in percentages instead. And then, so that would be like the base style sheet, and then for a larger screen you could modify that, and for a smaller screen you can modify that. Any other questions? Okie doke. Have a good weekend. See you on Monday.